Hey, folks, welcome back to the show. This is your host, Ryan Kennedy, and I have a very awesome guest on the show today to talk about a medicinal plant that I've personally been using the past couple years, and I've had great results with recommending this plant to patients in my practice for everything from relieving anxiety to stress management to boosting sleep quality and just enjoying the mood enhancing effects. And the plant I'm referring to is called Kava. And I've invited Cameron George on the show today to discuss Kava since he's one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever heard speak on this. So Cameron, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I want to start by an overview of how you came across Kava and the impact it's had on your life.
Oh man, yeah, very long story, but I'll give you the Reader's Digest version, the condensed version of it. I came across Kava like a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs and influencers, sort of in the health and wellness space or in any market. It was really what I call sort of a pain to purpose type of journey. I mean, a lot of these discoveries and these endeavors that I'm involved in today really sort of came out of my own journey back to health. I got severely sick in my early 20s. Had sort of what we call in this sort of world, the functional medicine paradigm, kind of like the perfect storm of a lot of these negative stressors that came together in my life. Genetic susceptibility, toxic exposures, emotional traumas, the whole thing came together and just had this explosion happen, and the bottom fell out at a pretty early age, which is actually, I got tremendously sick, became sort of fully handicapped, at one point, started with minor fatigue, ended up in severe fatigue, eventually ended up with a bunch of crazy food reactions, food allergies, having seizures, all kinds of stuff, was basically totally incapacitated. And then, spent years trying to rehabilitate my health and try to figure out, investigate, first of all, what the heck caused it? Mm-hmm. What was the multifaceted, picture that led to me being, thrust into this chronic disease process, and then trying to figure out how to claw my way out through, a myriad of different, multi-therapeutic approaches, right? Dietary approaches, treatments, therapies, modalities, basically to address cause and to help to sort of give my body an extra boost to accelerate and actually help facilitate the healing process. So I sort of stumbled across Kava, in the midst of that journey. I lost my health and exhausted the whole allopathic model with the whole drug route. It ended up disastrous, made everything way, way worse, and put me, that was actually what kind of, put me in the most, severe level of my process. And then sort of, ventured out into, the functional alternative medicine sort of paradigm, looking at, basically anything that was research based under the sun. I spent many years just delving in and scouring medical and scientific literature and talking to doctors, researchers, scientists, traveling around to various places, trying different things, and eventually got, aligned and integrated into a network of functional medicine doctors that helped me sort of systematize all of these individual sort of things that I had found into something that actually allowed me to eventually get my life back. However, when I mentioned just a second ago that part of, the symptomatic portion of what I was experiencing when I was at my worst was I developed all, this sort of neurotoxic sort of autoimmune sensitivity syndrome, where I developed these crazy reactions, like I was saying, to foods and to supplements and to even chemicals and fragrances and different things. It sort of happens in these neurotoxic illnesses whenever, the system becomes so overwhelmed. It's kind of like a form of PTSD where you start just spouting out crazy reactions that are as severe as a severe peanut allergy, but it was just, I was reacting to everything, right? That I would go into anaphylaxis at times. I would be jettisoned into a seizure, and I was having 10 seizures a day at one point, and lost the ability to eat foods, and that gets scary. And then eventually started reacting to even water, which is just nuts at just how sick I was. So basically I was put on heavy doses of benzodiazepine drugs, these anti-anxiety, anxiolytic, anti-seizure drugs, to help control the convulsions and to allow me to just even sleep and to not have these dangerous reactions, to be able to eat food and stuff. They eventually started to lose their effectiveness. And, on those drugs, you kind of set up the precedent, they lose their effectiveness, tolerance ensues, and then you go off of them and you ricochet even farther in the other direction in the withdrawal process. which was, it was becoming lethal at the time. It was a very bad situation. So I was looking for a plant-based, non-addictive, non-toxic alternative to these benzodiazepine drugs that could help control my convulsions, hopefully reduce my reactions, allow me to tolerate, a plethora of different, approaches, all the dietary stuff, basically all the things that I had the best chance of helping to get me well. And I really wasn't expecting to find it, but I was in a really bad situation. Up until this point, I'd already spent years sort of delving into this stuff. So I kind of knew what was out there in the research and knew what was out there and what people were using. I had tried a lot of different things, tried medical cannabis, and tried all the standard sort of anxiolytic herbs and different things, all of which are fine, but, for me in my situation, it was a little bit like trying to, take down an elephant with a BB gun. It was just like not going to be enough for the situation that I was in. And so I was having a conversation with an individual who I had met, who was a farmer and an indigenous islander from these islands in the South Pacific, which is the place where kava comes from. And he was from Vanuatu, which is right next to Fiji. So kava has been used there for like 3,000 years. It's really the home of where most of the kava in the world comes from, is from this island chain there. And he just, suggested to me, he's like, well, have you tried kava? Right. And I'm like, well, I have, I got these capsules from the health food store a couple of years ago, and they're under the name Kava. And it was no more really to me than like chamomile tea, or maybe a little bit stronger, mildly anxiolytic. And I said it just wasn't enough. And he kind of chuckled and said, like, well, that's not real kava. That's a kava-like product. That's not like the drink that we drink. It is a whole another level of, therapeutic efficacy. Right. And so I was like, okay, really great. And I didn't realize that distinction was there. I didn't realize that extracting it a certain way could like cut down most of the effects. Didn't understand the full, the significance of what we call the entourage effect of getting the complete spectrum of active constituents and consuming it like a food, which makes more difference with some plants than others. With kava, it's make or break. So he sends me a bag of this dried root, basically, and tells me how to prepare it, just like the indigenous islanders do. So in the islands, you go to a kava bar, you go into a village in one of these islands, they've been consuming this for thousands of years. And, basically what you get is like this bowl of what looks like muddy water. And that's what kava is. Kava is this full spectrum, anxiolytic, mood boosting, nootropic elixir. It's the full spectrum drink that's prepared by grinding and kneading down the roots of this shrub called Piper methysticum, which is kava, that grows exclusively in this part of the world. And they knead it into, in a strainer bag into a bowl of water for like 45 minutes. And you end up with that bowl. And then they use it in ceremonies. They use it for everything in their culture, just like we use coffee or alcohol. It's as common. They use it for weddings, funerals, spiritual ceremonies, social gatherings. It's used for everything there. It's used to bring a sense of community, because it kind of brings that social lubrication that alcohol brings in that traditional form. It has minor entheogenic qualities, like which we would correlate to what we see in like the psychedelic compounds that are becoming popular today, but without making you trip or hallucinate. It kind of brings you into this introspective state that's very easy to connect to people. It reduces anxiety, it improves sleep, while sort of activating the mind. So it kind of elicits a state of calm, enhanced focus, right? So people use it as a coffee alternative because coffee makes some people jittery. This brings you into sort of a calm focus that's very relaxed, to get you into that sort of mode. So it's totally non-addictive. So he sends me the actual stuff. I prepare it. And I start preparing it, and then I start consuming it, and I'm like totally blown away by it, because within 2 weeks, like virtually probably like 90% of my reactions were gone. And I was reacting to everything, convulsions, seizures, the whole thing. And within a month, actually about 2 months, I was completely off of benzodiazepines, regular use. And which was just, it just completely blew me away, because if you know anything about benzodiazepines and withdrawal process, there, like sometimes it takes a year and a half to taper. And then you can even be totally kind of screwed up and imbalanced after that, for a long time. And it's just, they're some of the hardest drugs to get off of. It's just a nasty situation, as nasty as opiates in many ways, and alcohol. So I was obviously completely blown away by it. got the ability to eat foods again and to start doing some of these therapies. And so it was that leverage point that allowed me to sort of relax, to get me out of that paralyzing state of constant stress, constant anxiety, constant reactivity, constant fear. Even allowed me to sleep, improve my sleep. And it was a good leverage tool. It wasn't the only thing that I used to get me well, but it was a tremendous tool that came in as like a safe crutch to get me off of the benzos and allow me to do the things that eventually got me well. And so that's kind of how I arrived at it. And that's how we arrived at this company, because I was working with this network of functional medicine doctors. They eventually hired me to start, being involved in the research side of, formulating protocols for their physicians. And I did a lot of research for various books, influencers in the field, and just started doing a lot of work in the functional medicine, sort of health and wellness space for various influencers and just doctors in general, developing product and stuff. And it was sort of an obvious thing that we started this project, because I realized pretty quickly that this just wasn't present in the marketplace. Like, it just wasn't there at all. Like in its traditional form, and it has every ability to be as proliferative as a cup of coffee if it's standardized and if it's tested to have the right material, the right strains, which we've worked so hard over the last 8 years to work preemptively with the regulatory agencies to set standards, and then to build a supply chain that can handle sort of that whole thing as we scale up. And sort of, because what we're trying to do is to try to integrate it fully into every layer of the existing infrastructure in the market, and make it available to people as a regular food product in its more subtle form, and then as a medicinal product in its, sort of alcohol alternative in its more potent form, using different strains, different extraction methods, et cetera, but methods that all mimic traditional preparation. So that's sort of how we arrived at it and where we're at now as a company. True Kava is more than just a company that's providing Kava. It's also an initiative and in an advocacy campaign, for safe usage of quality Kava, and just education as to what Kava is as well. So
that's quite the journey, Cameron. I appreciate you sharing that. And I love what you shared about pain to purpose. I think a lot of us that get into this field really do so out of a tragedy. I know for me, my mom passed of cancer due to a lot of misinformation in the oncology space and, Western medical treatments, and really just a lot of misleading advice leading up to that point. And that what spun me on this journey. And so I think that's just amazing story. And as you were healing throughout that process, when you found Kava, was that the main thing that really shifted things for you? Or were you also, you mentioned it wasn't the only thing. What else were you doing that brought you? Because I've worked with patients in that situation who were two situations. One, who were going through horrific benzo withdrawals, which when you get yourself into trouble with benzos, that is a rocky road to get out of, like you shared. And also people who had developed such extreme chemical sensitivity, EMF sensitivity, and food sensitivity that, like you said, with your experience, they reacted to almost anything. They had to sit in a dark room to not feel like they were in severe pain and discomfort. And so I'm curious what other strategies and protocols you found highly effective during your healing journey, in addition to the Kava.
There was a lot that we layered in. We layered things in very slowly, because when you end up on that level of the sensitivity spectrum, the autoimmune spectrum, it's slow and low is the name of the game. You can't tolerate hardly anything. The good thing is that Kava kind of came in. What we know now, in the scientific literature, and this is something that's been understood by indigenous islanders forever, there's a phenomenon that comes from Kava that's called reverse tolerance, which makes it very different than any other pharmaceutical or even most of the plant compounds, is that, most substances, especially that are psychoactive or euphoric, you get the most prominent effect first time you take it, and then tolerance ensues, receptors downregulate, and you end up basically in a state of neurotransmitter resistance. And then, you just get less and less effects, or it levels off or whatever. Kava is just the opposite. The least you'll ever feel Kava is the first time you take it, because there's a loading period. And most people feel it in the beginning, but you feel it even more after taking it a month. And it was proposed a long time ago that this had something to do with an upregulatory process that was going on at the GABA receptor sites. And we know now from the literature that's starting to be unpacked, and that is in fact the case. And so, which is just phenomenal, right? That not only does it give you this acute relief, but it also helps to rehabilitate the parasympathetic nervous system that's been beat down and imbalanced by too much stress, too much trauma, and end up in this sympathetic reactive dominance kind of thing. So Kava was part of it for sure. the longer that I drank kava, it helped to retrain that system and upregulate, and I just became less and less reactive. So it kind of came in as this crutch. But while I was doing that, sort of working at the chemical level with kava, I was also just working on sort of emptying the stress bucket, because at the end of the day, this chemical sensitivity, this autoimmune spectrum, hypersensitivity comes from an overflowing stress bucket, physical, chemical, emotional stressors. And the system just becomes so traumatized that it basically sees everything as a threat. And with good reason, it's been so hurt. Basically, it's trying to protect you. So it's spouting off these crazy reactions indiscriminately to even things that are normally good for you. It's not just things that are bad for you, right? Not gluten and these kind of things. It can be anything and everything. And so you have to lower that stress burden, but it's hard to do because you end up in this negative feedback loop where you're neurotoxic and your liver toxic, and a lot of it is physical toxins and metabolic waste that builds up. And a lot of that is because the system gut permeability has happened, which is part of the going into the autoimmune process, leaky gut. And you end up with this leaky system that becomes like a magnet for toxin. It doesn't have the available energy, the metabolic ability to be able to get rid of waste, and so it attracts waste because the system is so you become progressively more toxic, and then the system becomes more reactive because it's full of more of the irritants, stress. And then you've got the emotional trauma on top of that, of the whole process that helps prime it. And it's this massive spiral. So you got to interrupt that pattern. Kava is a great way, a tool for interrupting that pattern, so that you can start to relax, start to sleep better. Everything improves when you sleep better and all this stuff. But at the same token, I started navigating a process for emptying the bucket physically by navigating a true cellular detoxification process, right? So there are companies out there like Quicksilver, or this company, Systemic Formulas, that I was working with, that has developed whole intricate sort of medical procedural systems for addressing detox. I'm not talking about like a liver or a colon cleanse, a 10-day or this or that. I'm talking about a long-term process. It took you years, possibly decades, to accumulate the neurotoxins in your neural tissue, and they don't come out in 10 days. You have to work at the cell level to upregulate the systems that are the detox pathways, right? The glutathione system, the whole thing from an intracellular standpoint. Then you have to make sure and improve cell function enough, improve the membrane integrity, improve the integrity of the extracellular space, use certain types of safe binders in cycles, right? We use certain types of hydrolyzed zeolites that go into the cell. There's a system that we use to start at the cell and to usher the toxins out. And then we use binders in the gut to make sure that the toxins don't get reabsorbed, or to cut down on auto intoxication, which is an old, it's a relatively old approach that sort of came out of people with mold toxicity that used, cholestyramine, which was like a synthetic one, but we use different types of carbon that sit in the gut, because a lot of the toxin makes its way to the liver and sits there and gets bound up to bile and then gets reabsorbed. So there's this whole process of making sure to usher waste out from the cell and then make sure that it makes it fully out of the body. And that way you can efficiently start to lower your toxic burden, and you become less reactive when you do that. The problem is detox is also harsh on your system. You have to go slow. So Kava helps in that, sort of down-regulating and calming down the reactivity towards that. So there was detoxification. I was sort of working under the hood with the detoxification. And then I was sort of, keeping everything at bay with the Kava and helping to rehabilitate. And then I slowly integrated different types. It's like, all of healing at the end of the day comes down to a very simple principle: out with the bad, in with the good, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, and so that's simple. And the way that you execute it can be quite complicated, but it's basically like remove the interference and then feed the body's intelligence, the correct nutrients, the correct therapies, the correct energies, all of those things that help it do what it already prioritizes and does, right? You can only assist it and amplify the body's ability to turn over bad cells into good cells, damaged cells into healthy, robust cells. And so on top of that, so I did detoxification. Of course, Kava helped in that process. And then did all kinds of nutritional stuff, good fats, good clean proteins, targeted supplementation, all of the basic stuff that we use in functional medicine that definitely helps along with everything else. And then I took a lot of regenerative medicine approaches too. Out of all the things that I did, from hyperbaric oxygen to PEMFs and different things, the thing that was most profound for me was stem cells. Yeah. And that's another thing that's got to be sourced correctly. That's becoming a booming industry. You get a lot of crap that's out there, stuff that doesn't even contain the right cells, umbilical cord cells or neutral cells that don't cause graft versus host reactions. And I was too sick to go through the procedure of having like bone marrow extracted and all this kind of stuff that a lot of people are doing. But I got tremendous benefit off of exosomes, periodic exosome infusions and stem cell infusions. And once I started doing those, stem cells are some of the most powerful modulators of the immune system. So my reactivity just started to stabilize permanently more and more and more. And I just started to slowly level out as I would start getting these regular infusions, like I say regular, once every 6 months. And so that was a big thing. So it was a combination of a lot of these different things that eventually built the inertia enough behind my healing process to where my body then eventually took over and was healthy enough to just be robust and healthy again. And then eventually leveled out,
Yep.
So.
And it's important for people to understand it's never just one thing. It's always a cumulative effort of a whole bunch of different variables at play. And I love what you shared on detoxification. I just did an episode on that with an expert talking about how it's a slow process. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And the sicker you are, the slower you have to go to not overload your pathways and create even worse problems for yourself. And I love Dr. Dan Pompa's work with True Cellular Detox. And I know you've done some work with him. So all that stuff is very valuable to share. But coming back to the Kava and the reverse tolerance, something I'm personally fascinated with is to start to achieve this reverse tolerance effect. Does someone have to use Kava on a daily basis? Or, for example, I use Kava maybe once or twice a week, just on more of an as needed basis, not as a daily use type of thing. Would that also achieve a long-term reverse tolerance effect and helping to resensitize any GABA receptors?
It appears that it does. In my experience, it does. It just works slower. Obviously, the faster you load, if you use it every day, and if you're drinking like the drink, especially like the products that we have coming up in the future are more of like the kick of what you'd get from a Kava bar. The Kavaplex oil that we have today is more of like a controlled daily tonic that's more subtle, that's meant to be tolerated by all ages and any time of the day. So it's kind of like the baseline product. And then we sort of go up from there to the more potent stuff. If you're drinking the drink, like the stuff that we have coming up, then that loads it a little faster. If you drink it every single day, then you get that buildup effect, that reverse tolerance effect faster. But eventually, if you take it 2 to 3 times a week, it'll get you there a little bit slower to your maximum. After about 2 months of taking it regularly, if you were taking it every day for 2 months, that's going to get you about at your maximum of how potent Kava is going to be for you. And then it levels off and stays there. But at that point,
Got it. And one thing with the Kava, especially for daily use, that I think is important to outline, especially on the topic of detoxification, is the effect on the liver. So I know there's a lot of myths floating around that Kava is really hard on the liver, and I've heard you speak eloquently on, why this is really not the case. And I'd like you to explain and break down how this misconception came to be, and kind of clarify, if Kava has any negative effects on our liver.
Yeah, totally. That's definitely one of the first, major, misconceptions, misnomers, basically that virtually anyone who's just Googled Kava has come across at some point, heard of on websites or blogs or forums or anything like that. It actually used to be more proliferative because now it's starting to shift to about 50-50 of what you see back and forth. But because, within the scientific community, there really is no discrepancy anymore. It's only with just in the public domain. It's like once something gets out there, a belief system, people just repeat it to the point in which they're not even like tracing it back to the origin of where the initial claim came from, or can't even articulate that. And it really, this entire belief system around Kava or correlation to liver toxicity came from literally one series of studies from one product from one pharmaceutical company in 2001, 2002 in Germany. And, basically this was one pharmaceutical company that was trying to, at the time, they realized there was sort of a rush to get, Kava, into the marketplace and to create patentable products like pharmaceutical companies normally are trying to do, to try to distinguish and to try to, you basically own the substance, not realizing that with Kava, you're actually going to get something that's not only, ineffective by creating synthetic isolates, because you kill potency like you do with these solvent extractions and these products on the shelf, but you also get something that's potentially unsafe because of the way that you're doing it like that. So basically, this whole process This pharmaceutical company tried to create this product. They didn't really pay any homage or understanding to traditional preparation methodologies, like how the indigenous people in these countries have been using them daily for 3,000 years. They just looked in the literature and found that, oh, we want these two compounds, these single compounds. So we don't care what plant material we get it from as long as we get these compounds. They end up sourcing out low quality, cheap plant material, the cheapest they could find. And it actually wasn't mostly from the roots of the plant, which is the only thing that's been consumable daily in islanders. And that's actually part of the definition of kava, is the full spectrum water or pressure extracted drink from the roots of Piper methysticum, right? So not the above ground leaves and stems of the plant, which do contain kavalactone still, but they also contain plant defense alkaloids that the plant produces to protect itself from pests, which cause roughage and can cause inflammation in the body. Not even like bad toxicity as far as that we know, but a little bit of toxicity. But if you do like they did, is they took this material, used solvents like acetone and different things, which highly concentrated those alkaloids, right? So now you have something that is not by definition kava at all, right? You have something that's a synthetic product that is an isolate that's a massive deviation from what kava is. So it's not kava. And then what they did was they gave it to many patients in the studies that were, most of which were on heavy doses of acetaminophen or coming off of alcohol, which was part of what it was set up to be. So they already had compromised liver function, virtually every person in the trials. So a few people got hurt. There was a couple even like cases of liver failure. And then this turned into this big story that just proliferated and just blew up. And then countries got scared and reactively just started banning it, not scheduling it, but just banning it for sale. Like it was this toxic thing, totally looking over the fact that traditional kava has been drank daily by 90% of the population of these islands for 3,000 years with no reports of adverse health effects whatsoever. So it's like, it doesn't make sense from the get-go. That's why it was never banned in the United States. FDA just kind of released a disclaimer that says, well, we don't know what happened, but you might want to be careful, basically was what it said. But in the scientific community, this has been fully fleshed out over the last 15 years, so much so that it's very clear that this was a quality control issue. The WHO, which is normally resistant to stuff like this, has even taken a firm position saying this is a quality control issue. It's been consumed safely for years in this. And we've actually worked with them to develop this international quality standard that I mentioned earlier that lays out these criteria. It has to be traditional preparations, root material. It's got to be tested for mycotoxins, a lot of these things. And within the next year, we're going to be able to get food classification like coffee, which is even farther than like supplement type classification. But yeah, so they basically even taken a statement saying that kava is a safe consumable food product if it meets these criteria. If not, it's not by definition kava. So virtually every country in the world that previously had a ban on kava is either in the process of lifting their bans or already has lifted it. So it's not even really an argument anymore. It's just a floating sort of, belief system that's kind of going out there. And part of what we're doing is to try to educate the public and do all of the credible work with the scientific community and the regulatory agencies to bring the transparent truth about the differentiation between what is kava and what is not kava. And that it's a food product. It's very similar to what happened like in the early 90s in the United States with tryptophan. Tryptophan, for a lot of people have been around supplements, may remember that it was banned like in the early 90s, the amino acid tryptophan, for a short period of time because someone synthesized something that was not chemically tryptophan that had neurotoxins in it. It hurt a few people and they banned all of tryptophan because of that. That was flushed out. Tryptophan's now on the market again, right? So it's like if you were to ban, if it's like, someone got sick from something that wasn't meat and you banned meat, right? Because you thought it was meat. It's not. And so it's a very interesting situation, but it's not unheard of. It's actually very common. Virtually every single plant medicine, especially psychoactive plant medicine, has had the strikes against its reputation. It's kind of like this whole movement in the past 7-8 years about distinguishing CBD from marijuana. It's the same kind of thing. It's taking a second, third look at everything and making, the devil's in the details, understanding the nuances of a subject and not just blanketly dismissing something because there's some part of it in some context that was actually harmful.
One herb that is getting similar kind of heat, and I'm curious to get your opinion on this plant that is becoming more popular in use. And I've used it many times in the past and found a lot of benefit with proper sourcing and proper dosing, is Kratom. Mm-hmm. And is that something you've looked into? Can you speak on your thoughts on the benefits or downsides and what your thoughts are on that plant?
Sure. Yeah. So it goes by, it's spelled that way. And it's actually in Thailand, it's called Kratom. It's just what we must be. So some people say Kratom, Kratom, but yeah, that's basically what we're talking about for anyone who's heard any of those names. So Kratom is kind of to opiates what Kava is to benzodiazepines and alcohol, even though Kava has efficacy on withdrawal from opiates as well too, because the GABA system just down regulates and calms everything down. It's similar in that regard. So basically it is a plant-based opioid, but an opioid that is more biologically compatible, that doesn't cause respiratory depression at virtually any dosage. Respiratory depression is what people die from in overdoses from opiates. And so, and instead of binding strongly to the receptors, it kind of hovers around the receptors and modulates it in a way that is far less addictive. Now, Kratom does differentiate from Kava. Kratom is not as tonic and not as anywhere. It's not safe as safe as Kava for regular all the time use, right? Sure. But it's far safer than any synthetic opiate. It's gotten a lot of unnecessary negative press just because there is such thing as Kratom withdrawal. But it's probably, in most people, it appears, and what we've seen is that it's a little worse than coffee withdrawal. And for very sensitive people, maybe a little worse than that. But nobody is like going like far cry, like suicidal off of Kratom withdrawal. You know what I mean? It's a tool that has a place. And it's a great tool to transition off of opiates that like ruin lives, right? That like kill people, ruin lives, everything. So I see it as more of like an acute transitional tool and something to be used in spurts, not something to be used every day. Kava sort of builds the system. It's more tonic. It's more modulatory. Kava can be like jettison like a food product like coffee into the marketplace. Kratom is going to have a more limited spectrum of use. But it still is a tremendous medicine. There's a lot of it that's toxic out there, contaminated with all kinds of nonsense, heavy metals, the whole thing. And there's many different strains of it. And so sourcing it correctly, it kind of is a similar story in that regard. There's some strains that are more daytime, more nighttime, but it is a good medicine too. It has its place as well too. It's just, there's a lot of these places like head shop type of places. And we're trying to sort of get away from that image of Kava, that are just providing like what people want is like natural highs, and just like throwing Kava and Kratom and all these different things and mixing them together. And a lot of them are sourced poorly. The Kava has to be sourced. It's got to be root material, like we said, and everything. And so a lot of these mixes, you just got to be very careful about what you're getting and mixing. Most of the time, pretty much all the time, you're going to be safer with any of these things than you are with their like synthetic alternatives, right? Like with like opiates, like benzodiazepines, but you still can get contaminants come through. And with Kratom, there is such thing as withdrawal. So just be aware of that if a person is going to engage with that thing, and just be very cautious and very careful. Kratom is not issued or categorized as a dietary supplement. So it's far, far more limited as to what you can do, and Kava is moving even farther towards food classification through our standards. So it's just in a different league as far as like its ability to proliferate, its safety. But Kratom is one of those other kind of things that's sort of one of those gray area classification compounds that, compared to almost anything that's synthetic, it's pretty darn safe, and it's a good medicine.
Yeah, I think like you shared, it's a great alternative to, it's the lesser of two evils. Let's put it like that. And I absolutely love Kratom. I've been using it sporadically once a week or once every 2 weeks as a nootropic in low doses. I find the dopaminergic effect is fantastic for energy and focus and mental clarity. And so for those reasons, when used responsibly, I see a lot of potential as a mental performance enhancing aid. I've never used it as an analgesic, which I know requires much higher dosing, but nonetheless, I've had a lot of people rely on that as an alternative to opiates and find good success. So I think that's something worth mentioning. Back on the benzo, before we wrap up here, I have several listeners who have reached out to me that have been suffering, in the active stages of benzo withdrawals, kind of getting poor recommendations from medical doctors that, got on them in college for mild to moderate anxiety. And then they got to a place where it was so severe and they tried to get off it and had just these horrific problems, as, you could relate to based on your story. And so you've already shared Kava being a excellent option for individuals. I know we're not sharing any medical advice here, just your personal opinions. Is that something that you personally would use daily to help with benzo withdrawal? And what other strategies would you integrate or share with the audience who might be going through challenges similar to what you did, but more specific to benzos, not so much the autoimmune and different toxicity that you overcame, but more so the withdrawal effects of that class of pharmaceuticals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I in my personal experience and what we've just observed, right, and people that have chosen to do that, it's been the best single tool, right? And then around it, basically the strategy that I would take, first of all, yes, I took it every single day whenever I was withdrawing from benzos or whenever I was on benzos, and then started to taper off the benzos very slowly and titrate the dose whenever I felt as though I was stabilized and comfortable. And then I started to reduce it very slowly was the way that I approached it. But at the same time, the best thing to do is to do everything you can from sort of a functional medicine or health and wellness standpoint to strengthen up the integrity of the system, just to make it more flexible and to make it more adaptive, to strengthen adaptability, right? So that's a very broad statement, but basically everything that you can do from a supplemental standpoint, from a dietary standpoint, from a sleep standpoint, if you can start optimizing your sleep, everything gets better, right? Everything modulates a little bit better. You're going to adapt better, and your body's going to be able to reset its receptors and everything a little bit better and replenish that brain chemistry that's been exhausted or been sapped out of you by the drugs, which is really what you want to do. So basically anything that helps metabolic health is going to help you recover faster. Everything that feeds the mitochondria is going to help you recover faster. So just whatever the person can tolerate. A lot of times people in benzo withdrawal can't tolerate a lot of like physical exercise, but they may be able to tolerate, say, sauna or hot cold therapy or things that to work out the mitochondria and help to get this endogenous chemical release and help to get blood flow in these different places. So things like that, obviously getting high good fats that really, really help with the cell membranes, in the neurological system and stuff. All of those things are kind of the basics that feed the base of the system at its roots. And that's a really basic kind of overview of it. Kava was very, very strong. There are other compounds that if you can stack with Kava that are GABAergic that kind of intensify its effects and bring out more of the sleep qualities or this and that. There's a compound, a flavonoid from Magnolia officinalis, magnolia bark, which is called hanakiol, which is like a GABA precursor to some degree, but a GABA enhancing agent as well too, natural. It's very strong. You can stack with Kava. There's a company called Econugenics that produces that, and there's others as well out there. There's a Chinese herb that's very good that stacks with Kava. It's called Ziziphus jujube, and it's basically one of what they call Chinese like Shin tonic. But what we know from the scientific literature, it's also a GABAergic. It helps sort of with that GABA glutamate balance, and it helps to sort of with that recycling process and to sort of feed that system. You can obviously take any of the basic things to stack along with Kava. You can just take straight GABA. You can take L-theanine, any of these basic sort of amino acids, taurine and stuff. You can even, cycle things, stronger things that are more like borderline synthetics, pseudosynthetic, not as bad as benzos, like phenobut, phenylbutyric acid. That's in there. You don't want to use that all the time, but you could stack it in there to help give a little bit of that extra power to hit the GABA B receptors, so you're not hitting the same thing all the time. There's some strategies around that. Basically, most of the strategies that are directly targeting from a supplemental standpoint are going to target that system, though. You're trying to prop it up. And Kava is one of the best things to do that. But there are these other compounds around there that help. From a therapeutic standpoint, I've never seen any single easy therapy that's like a one shot, one time kind of thing than stem cells that can really help increase a person's adaptability like really fast. So in any kind of recovery process, or just seeing that work wonders. Now that's an expensive intervention. You're going to pay several $1,000s for an infusion if you get them at the right places and stuff, but it is an option, right? The other thing is NAD infusions as well. NAD is like the master regulator of metabolism, and this is something that's becoming very popular in the anti-aging community. It helped activating these sirtuin genes and everything that help the turnover of stem cells. But they really help to just add metabolism to the brain and help the brain start really producing the chemistry that's lost there from the drugs. And it really helps with the withdrawal process. So different types of nutrient IVs, primarily IVs of amino acids, potentially stem cells, different amino acids, right? That are the precursors to these neurotransmitters. And then just basic like Myers cocktail type stuff, glutathione, N-acetylcysteine. The benefit of taking them in IV form, you just get your levels up really fast. And most people that are sick and benzo withdrawal, they've got all kinds of, digestion issues because they're in poor health a lot of times. So it's harder for them to absorb nutrients a lot of times. So IVs just really bolster up and get those nutrients into the brain that help the process along. Outside, long-term strategy to deal with the underlying cause of why you're taking the benzos, detoxification, and all that stuff is in kind of the wheelhouse of stuff that I use together. Kava was a big leverage point that made a huge difference though.
Super helpful strategies. And I've seen NAD work wonders for people, nutrient IVs like you shared. Of course, the foundation can't be neglected. Hydration, sleep, good diet, good lifestyle practices. That's always going to be the essentials. And then these are more just adjuncts to all those basic practices. So as we wrap up here, Cameron, what should people seek out when they're looking to buy high quality kava? I know a lot of people listen to this and are going to say like, man, this kava stuff sounds incredible. I want to get my hands on some. Maybe people have tried, the kava teas that don't really do much and some of the other stuff you've shared. So they want to get their hands on some real deal kava. And I know your company, True Kava, TRU Kava, I've used and absolutely love with your kava oils and the little shots you guys came out with. I've been really digging those. So what should people look for? Is there an organic certification, or are there any parameters you recommend that would be a red flag or, the green light, so to say, when they're shopping around for kava?
Yeah. So basically what you would want to do if you're really, really wanting to be careful, which you should always want to be, is find a company that does third-party lab testing that meets all of these qualification standards, basically, that does kava lactone profile, testing that can verify that they do chlorophyll testing, meaning that shows that they have 100% root material, no aerial parts in the kava. And then you look around you start experimenting with different strains. If you have companies that are using individual strains, most companies, there are some companies that claim, and it's really not, so there's no really way of proving that to you. That's just something that's more of an experimental thing or an experiential thing that you kind of know the strain once you've started to use it. Of course, in the future, we'll have, methods of doing that, but we do use individual strains. We have a strain, a basic strain that's very popular in Vanuatu. It's very balanced across the board. That's grown organically. It's, everything is grown organically in Vanuatu. And so we don't have the organic certification yet. We will once we have the, in some of the other islands, Hawaii and different things. But yeah, so those are the basic things. And so we can provide that those third party COAs, the lab results, to anyone who's interested in them batch by batch. Most companies, you're kind of rolling the dice because they just don't do that. They make all kinds of claims, but they can't send you anything. They can't do any of that type of stuff, So yeah. And then you just have to experience it, and sort of feel it for yourself. But those are the criteria that I would look for. I would look for, kava lactone profile. I would look for testing for mycotoxins, which is a problem. Mold toxins are heavy on kavas. It's a tropical plant. A lot of kavas infested with that, or certain types of bacteria, pesticides, the whole thing. So someone who does testing for purity and potency is basically what you'd be looking for.
Right.
With us, our two products, we've got the oil product, which I had mentioned earlier, is sort of like the entry level product, most versatile, taking anything, put it in like a bulletproof style coffee. Caffeine and MCT go great with it. It helps to increase the uptake, kick it in harder, faster, takes the edge off some of the jitteriness of the coffee, the whole thing. And then the shots are kind of like an extra adjunct for extra stressful situations. What we have coming up is a whole line of drinks, which is sort of like taking it to the next level. Those are going to be more of the full like recreational experience, like full alcohol alternative, which you get at a kava bar in the islands. So less controlled, more of just the overall, and those are going to be available in drink form, carbonated drink form, just like you would get a beer or a kombucha. That's what it's going to be in. We have a new shot that's going to be representative of that as well sometime in the next month. So, so that's sort of like what we've focused on with the product line, is having these drinks available and then having an oil form, available as more of sort of a daily tonic supplement.
I love the broad spectrum of effects, because I've used Kava in social situations like you're describing as a healthy alternative to alcohol to enhance verbal fluency and just kind of as a social lubricant. I've used it in, like you shared, coffee as more of a nootropic. And then I really enjoy using your guys' Kava shots before my yoga class. I find it really enhances the yoga practice in terms of your focus, your clarity, as well as just tranquility and ability to really go deep as part of the mental emotional side of that practice in conjunction with the physical stuff of kind of the uplifting. It's interesting because it uplifts you in an energetic way, but also relaxes you, so it's got kind of this really unique blend of benefits. So I love that. So I definitely recommend everyone listening in, check out True Kava. I think Cameron's going to give me a discount for all of my listeners. So I'll be sure to put that in the show notes. And Cameron, where can people find more of your work? If they want to connect with you on social media, website, where's the best place for people to go?
Yeah. So it's going to be TRU Kava, like on Instagram, it's going to be at TRU Kava. If you Facebook TRU Kava, our website is going to be trukava.com or gettrukava.com. Either one of those will take you to the spot. You can find all the research, the studies, various other podcasts, different types of media that we've done, the available products right now, any updates on what's going on in the Kava community. There's a blog on there as well too. So basically everything that's going on with this initiative, this project, you'll be able to find on there and just sort of keep up with what's coming out in the future and what's going on within the Kava community and what's going on as far as like the new availability and efficacy of new products as well too. So kind of take things to the next level.
Amazing. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Cameron. It's been great, man.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Thanks so much.